السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. داوديال كسر دوادة قيسي رحمة channel. أصحابتنا عصب صور دوادة أصحابتك كسر رسين هذه أتبادل ما سنتين. داوديال ما أنتوا حنكو سجنا هاي إيربور كم ده إيربور ده مجال ده إيرمنتون قبل كالبرتا أياكو سجنا هاي. إيربور كانوا قبنا كأهموزيم أما كيد كلجوهايو وحيالها تاريخ جاء. دبل حنا يا صعود تعديل المقلين رالي جاء هذا. إن شاء الله تعالى Gudaha أيام قالنا وحول بوالكاس Gudaha كجرو أيام دلنا سحسين دونا Diyaradaha كلا دوان كوا Rakaabka قادا كوا عيدانك إيو كوا خاص كا إن شاء الله تعالى صود وادا Gudaha أيام قالنا سوقلا. I have Daniel with me. He's gonna tell us more about the aircraft and equipment that we have here. So maanta waxaan rabnaa inaan idin tusno airportka Edmonton oo ku yaalo downtownka Aviation Museum oo Edmonton halka waxaa yaala diyaaradaha militariga ama ciidanka iyo diyaaradaha dadka qaada ama kuwa duurarka iyo meelahaas oo hunting ama xayawaanada lagu ilaaliyo ayaa meesha ku jiro. إن شاء الله تعالى دمان وحان إذن تصدون نمانتا هلك وحيلا جوجو دانيال أو representative كاميشن أصدق أيها نتصدونه أنا جنا مقال كستا وإنتن أنكو أرجنا إن شاء الله وادين سو قد بندونا إن شاء الله ونصور راعة.
So you just heard in the introduction that we're in the Alberta Aviation Museum. This building was founded in 1940 for the World War II British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. They trained pilots here, thousands of pilots in Edmonton. Not a lot of Edmontonians know about that history though, so it's a nice place to come and find out about the past that Edmonton's had. But the plane behind me you see here, this is a Bush plane. It is designed after a plane that was made in 1922, but the plane that you see here is actually a film replica. It was made for the film Map of the Human Heart. You can see the propeller is in an odd place on this plane. It's at the back of the plane. It's a pusher aircraft rather than a tractor aircraft. So a tractor aircraft has the propeller at the front, whereas a pusher aircraft is at the back. All the really early planes, like the Wright brothers planes, used the pusher system. And so, this is a good example of some of that early aviation technology. Now, something I like to ask tour groups when I'm here is when was the first ever flight? You know, how long ago was it? It's surprising. It was only in 1903 that the first ever powered flight took place out of Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. And that was, of course, the Wright brothers. And so all of this history here, you know, everything you could think of related to powered aviation, that's all in the last 120 years or so. So if you come on in, we'll show you some of the rest of the museum. So this plane right here, this is the Curtis Stinson Special. Curtis is the aircraft manufacturer. Stinson is the person you see right there standing in front of the plane, Katharine Stinson. And Special is because this plane was custom built for her. This was a big project from the Aviation Museum. We put a lot of man hours into putting this plane back together. A whole team of volunteers built this plane out of nothing but the propeller and the engine. The propeller and the engine are original, but the rest of it we put together for this, just to honor Katharine's legacy, because Katharine Stinson is one of the most important aviators in North America. She was the fourth woman to get her pilot's license in the United States. She invented skywriting as well as a number of other aviation maneuvers, and she was involved in aerobatics. She was an aviatrix, meaning that she did trick shows for various different crowds. She raised millions of dollars, literally millions of dollars, for the Red Cross. And you can see on the tail of the plane there's an American Red Cross symbol on the back, because during the war years, very unfortunately, she was banned from being a pilot, so she wasn't able to fight as a pilot, but she still did her part here back on home soil. And she also served as an ambulance driver in the war, so she did do her part overseas as well. But a very important aviator, and a connection to Edmonton as well, because she performed a really interesting first for Edmonton. She did the first ever airmail in Western Canada. In 1916, she flew a package of mail from Calgary to Edmonton, and there was a whole crowd. Thousands of people showed up to come and see it, and it was a big event back then. Nowadays, you know, airmail comes all the time, but back then it was a big deal. At the Aviation Museum, we like to talk about what planes are made out of. A lot of people think that these really early planes are made out of metal, like the commercial planes that we see nowadays, but they're not. The engine on this plane, for instance, is only, I think it's 68 horsepower. The original engine on the ground over there is 35 horsepower. That's not very strong. That's just slightly stronger than a lawnmower nowadays. So it needed to be very, very lightweight, and metal's way too heavy for a plane like this. So they actually made it out of fabric. And you can hear when I drum on this, it sounds like a drum on the wing. And that's because the wings are hollow. You can see on the other side how the wing is exposed over there, so you can see inside. And the body has to be extremely light. Now the fabric is not typical fabric. It's actually covered in a chemical called aircraft dope. Aircraft dope is similar to nail polish that we might use on our fingernails. And it basically tightens the fabric to the surface of the aircraft frame, and it also reduces the friction on the surface of it, because if you've ever seen a flag flapping in the wind for a long time, it'll get all torn up. You don't want that to happen to the trailing edge of your wing, so obviously it's useful to cover it in a chemical that would reduce the friction on the wing. So all the planes that I've talked about so far, they've been fabric planes. And this plane has an interesting history as well. This is the first ever aircraft that was made in a non-professional environment in Edmonton, so a home-built aircraft. And in this case, it was literally built in a guy's home. It was built in Mr. Want's basement. His name was Mr. Want, and he made it in his basement. He thought he could get it out. He couldn't. He had to break a whole wall down in his basement in order to get the plane out. He flew it for a few years, and then he ended up crashing it pretty close to the Aviation Museum here. It never flew again after that, so they donated it to us, and now we use it to show people what the planes are made out of. So this plane here, this is a big B25 Mitchell bomber. The B25 model was used a little bit in the Second World War. That's the generation that it was part of, but our particular B-25 didn't see any wartime activity. It was used by the 418 Squadron, which was a local reserve squadron that operated out of this hangar and out of the airfield behind us here. And the 418 operated this for a number of years. As you can see on the side, it says home of the Grey Cup. This was back when Edmonton was winning a lot of Grey Cups. We haven't won a Grey Cup in a little while, not in the same sort of run as we had back then. But you can see on the side there's a decal here, but it's very empty, it's very sparse. And the reason for that is that at a certain point in time, this plane actually crashed. And it actually crashed into the hangar that we're standing in right now. The plane crashed into the wall just over here. It's all repaired now, so of course it looks totally new, but it's a little bit of history, local history. The guy who actually was piloting the plane when it crashed is named Terry Champion, and Terry's still a volunteer here at the museum. He's still alive, and he's full of stories. Doesn't like talking about this plane as much as the other planes, I think, though, because it gave him the people give him a hard time about it. The reason the crash happened was a brake failure, so the hydraulics in the brakes failed, and the plane ended up having to go somewhere, and it ended up piloting it into the side of the building. But a little bit of local history with this one. So behind me you'll see a Starfighter, or a CF104. These were Cold War jets that were designed during the Cold War in order to intimidate Russian bombers over the DEW line. They were also designed to drop nuclear bombs, which is an interesting part of their history. They were known as the Widowmakers for a number of reasons. One of them was that the ejector seats in them used to fire out the bottom of the plane, I believe in the German models, rather than the top of the plane. They fixed that eventually, and they stopped doing that because it was difficult to flip the plane in order to do the ejection. But the plane is the fastest plane that the Canadian Air Force has ever flown to this day. It flew at Mach 2.01, which is around 1,300 miles per hour. To give you a sense of how fast that is, because of the air resistance on the bullets, if this plane had guns attached to the front of it, which some of the European models did, which by the way was a bad idea because it was not made for ground attacks, but they would put some guns on the front, and if they fired the guns, they would actually catch up to their own bullets if they were going at top speed. So that's how fast they're going at Mach 2. So a pretty spectacular piece of engineering, and also a warbird to be feared as well. So come on in here. This is our restoration hall. This is where we fix the planes up when they break. Most of the planes that we get in our collection came to us in some level of disrepair, some of them pretty extreme. As I mentioned, the Katharine Stinson Special came to us as only a propeller and an engine. Some of those planes out there have been in the bottom of a lake for 35 or 45 years in some case, and as I said, they're made out of fabric, right? So a lot of these planes decomposed in that time, and they come to us looking like a skeleton of a plane. So we have a couple ongoing projects right now, and of course, most of the planes out there were at one point in time a project here in the restoration hall. So behind me you see we're working on a Bell helicopter, a 206A. This is part of our restoration project in conjunction with the RCMP, because these helicopters used to be flown by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and now we're restoring it with its original RCMP colors, and maybe in about a year or so it'll be finished. Once it's finished, people will actually be able to sit inside of it, so make sure you come back and take a look at it then. And over here we have our really big project. These are two fuselages for P39 Air Cobras. We're only restoring one of these fuselages. The other one we're using to model parts and maybe to take some parts off of once in a while. But the P39 was an American World War II plane, and a pretty rare plane to see in a Canadian museum. They were made in America, but they were used primarily in Russia. And the reason there's an Edmonton connection is we used to be known as the gateway to Russia, because any time that a plane would have to fly from the States to Russia, they would go through Edmonton and then over the north. So thousands of these planes came through the airport in the field right behind us. And many of them made it all the way to Russia, but a couple of them were left behind, and so we're restoring a few of those. As you can see over here, we've had some headway. The plane is coming along. It's not quite there yet. We just got it a few months ago, of course. This might take us up to 4 or 5 years. So at the end of the restoration project, the plane will look brand new. It'll be really spectacular to see. This is the engine to the plane right here. It's already restored, as you can see. It's an Allison. The Allison is a V12 liquid-cooled engine. It has 1,150 horsepower, which, interestingly enough, it was not enough for what the Americans wanted to use these planes for. They wanted to use them for really high-level air combat, but they wanted a stronger engine for that. So the Russians used them, and they used them for low-level air combat. This is the schematic to the plane. So this is what the plane will look like at the end of its reconstruction. As you can see, the engine is in the middle of the plane. It's not up here at the front. Usually if you have a propeller plane, the engine's right up here at the front. But this is an odd design. They put the engine in the middle because they wanted space for this really big gun in the front. That's a 37mm gun in the front of this plane. And then they geared the propeller and they put a drive shaft through to the back. But that drive shaft ended up going right through the legs of the pilot. And that would spin at 1400 RPM. And apparently the American pilots didn't like this very much. But the Russians didn't care, so they sold them to the Russians. And it'll be an interesting piece of history once it's fixed up and out on the show floor.
Okay guys, hadda waxaan sameynayna insha Allah ta'ala diyaaradan aan koreynaa gudaheeda ayaan idin tusi doonaa. Diyaaradana waa qayb ka mid ah diyaaradaha dadka qaado insha Allah ta'ala kuwii militariga ama kuwii ciidankana aan idin tusi doonaa dhinacaas ay naga jiraan. Insha Allah ta'ala diyaaradan gudaha ayaan galeynaa soo raaca. Hey, come on in.
Founded over 100 years ago on the site of a traditional native.